Well, for more on the UK's rocky relationship with Europe, I'm joined by Nina Schick, analyst at independent think tank Open Europe. Thanks for joining us, Nina. So the UK's relationship with Europe, would you say that the UK has always been a reluctant member of the club?
Well, Sarah, perhaps reluctant isn't the right word in this context, because actually when it comes to a lot of the fundamental things in the EU, including the single market and EU enlargement, the UK was always a leading figure in those cases. Where the UK is different from the rest of the continent is when it comes to this idea of political union. So the UK sees the EU primarily as an economic bloc and not a political bloc. They see it more as a business relationship rather than a marriage, if you will.
But thank you, Nina. But the EU has become more of a political union. The powers of the European Parliament have increased, while at the same time, people, voters, seem to feel more remote from Brussels than ever. What can the EU do about that?
Well, that's primarily one of the big issues facing the EU right now, the democratic deficit. Voter turnout in the European Parliamentary elections has been on a steady decline. We don't know what the result will be this year, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not that will shift. And also, of course, another problem is that a lot of the people in the EU member states feel so far removed from Brussels that they feel that their voices are not represented at all in Brussels. So this is fundamentally a huge challenge that's facing the EU. And of course, one of the things that Brussels could do to help citizens feel as though their voice is being heard is to allow national parliaments to have more say in how EU policy is created.
Okay, and thinking about those national parliaments, immigration has become a hot button topic in many countries across the bloc, and the UK is no exception. But looking at the numbers, European immigration into the UK brings more to the economy than it takes out. So why do you think the economics and the politics are so far apart on this issue?
Well, yes, the free movement of workers has been extremely beneficial to the UK. And of course, it is one of the 4 pillars of the single market. And if you look at Britain, when, for example, Poland joined the EU 10 years ago, they were one of the first countries, along with Sweden and Ireland, to lift the transitional controls on Polish workers. However, where it gets politically sensitive is on the issue of benefits and welfare tourism, if you will. And as you mentioned, this is not an issue that's only a hot issue in the UK, but also in Germany, in the Netherlands. Today, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, came out writing a piece in a German paper saying that Germany would try to crack down on welfare tourism, similar to the debate that David Cameron's been having here in the UK.
Okay, and just finally, with the freedom of movement being a founding principle of the EU, if David Cameron does go to Brussels to negotiate concessions, can he really get anywhere significant on this point?
I think there's an important distinction to be made here between the free movement of people and access to welfare. I think it's perfectly plausible to uphold the former whilst protecting the latter. And as I already mentioned, David Cameron has allies in Europe on this issue, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte.
Thank you very much for your valuable insights, Nina. A pleasure to have you with us.